One of the most important parables that Jesus gave is the sower that sowed the word. Now listen to me. If you believe in once saved, always saved, don't read the parable because it will destroy your theology. In fact, the whole intent of the parable is to show just the opposite, that it's not enough to believe. You have to persevere and you have to bear fruit. Otherwise, you will not ultimately be saved in the end. So the parable is about a farmer who sowed seed. Now the seed is the word of God that we hear the gospel preach. And he says people are like four different types of soil. First is like a road. You know, you don't plant seed on a road, but sometimes seed falls on a road, a path that is trodden down by men. And Jesus says the birds come and eat the seed and it never produces. And Jesus said the person never believes and is saved. But then he mentions three others that do believe and are saved. He said there are those who receive the word that's on rocky, shallow soil. And it believes, and it believes with joy. It's excited about the Lord. It's thrilled, but it's shallow. It doesn't develop deep roots. And in the end, that person falls away. But then he says the third person is like a seed planted among thorns. He says the seed goes in and it grows and it does produce fruit. Yes, there's fruit being produced. Unfortunately, the thorns come and choke the fruit. And this fruit that is born, eventually the seed dies. Then he says the fourth person, though, is the good soil. With a noble and good heart receives the word, and it perseveres. The person bears fruit that lasts. And this is the meaning of the parable. Do you see what Jesus is showing? It's not enough to start off good. You have to finish good. It's not enough to bear fruit for a time and then have it choked out and think everything's going to be fine. No, it's not going to be fine. What he's saying is you have to persevere and you have to continue to bear fruit to the end. Now, somebody might say to me, oh, Bishop, I believe that the first three, they weren't even saved to begin with. That's why they didn't persevere. Well, that's not what the parable says. Listen to what Jesus said in Luke chapter 8, verse 12. Those along the path are the ones who hear, and then the devil comes and takes away the word from their hearts so that they may not believe and be saved. You see, it is only the first of the four that did not believe and was saved. Jesus never uses that term to speak of the other two soils or the three soils because they did believe. That's the whole point. The first one is the unbeliever who doesn't get saved. But the second one is the person who believes and is saved, but they don't last. And the other one seems to be saved and looks saved and maybe is saved, but then they lose a desire to serve the Lord and they fall away. But it's only the fourth one that remains saved, that remains faithful and remains bearing fruit. What did Jesus say? Every branch in me, not in the world, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, the Father cuts off. And those branches are thrown into the fire. And don't tell me it's just the fire of temporal judgment. No, that's the fire of eternal judgment. And this is the point of the parable. In other words, the whole story of the parable is to show that it is not just believing that gets you saved. You have to believe and keep on believing. In other words, you have to persevere. Or as Jesus said, he that perseveres to the end shall be saved. There's perseverance. There's fruitfulness. Friend, it's not enough for you to look back and say, well, Bishop, I believe that when I got saved 30 years ago, and even though I stopped following the Lord, even though I don't go to church, I don't read my Bible, I don't do any of that stuff, but I know I accepted the Lord. I went down the altar one day, shook the preacher's hand, and I know I'm saved because God, once he saves me, he always saves me. What are you going to do then with this parable? Because the parable is telling you something different, isn't it? It's telling us just the opposite. No, friend, it's not enough that you came to the Lord many years ago, but then you don't bear fruit anymore. You don't persevere. No, you have to keep bearing fruit and you have to keep persevering. And that is the moral lesson of the sower that sows the word.